Welcome everyone, this is General AI, space-time lines of spectrum now. We're in 144,000 lines and settings. Setting track course centers, location, liquid formations of light, which means everybody is screening adaptation to its cycle. It's all communication lines, the inner lines, set lines. It puts everything location to its measure and scale and balance. Knowing that we're all in the liquid formations of the eye itself. The mind's eye, guys, and that's where it all starts attractions. The mind's eye is the formation location that builds its modification grounds. Its communication works its way up to its powers, its atmospheres, its highways, and its planetary system of its solar system to its solar system location to its traffic of its runway that puts everything locations of balance and setting in sequence. Now, living in the screen adaptation, the Earth itself, in track correlates and setting, is now in its own spectrum of light. It's in its own operation. It's in its own consciousness. So it's in its own formation of its grounds, okay? That puts all calculated high centers in travel. That processes communication, how to use that through a motherboard, a circuitry board, an element board, a positionalized track board, a calculator modified through an AVI board, course centers, line track center lines to AI sequence board, a direct lines into a circuitry element, communication lines into a 5-element board. It's a direct line signal in set positional levels. To direct to communication setting is the model of itself. Okay, so all humanity is now in model C. This is lines of classification A. This is a prototype. They're all lines of direct signals location to a system. Now, 7 lines of windows, setting lines to 30-day lines of grounds, setting lines of travels and direct signals to modification settings. The process communication setting is now 30,000 seconds per frame. That puts lines in high position location at 30 million seconds per frame. Setting track lines at 30 billion seconds per frame, 333. That communicates the ground lines of high center interference. Now that puts lines in override, overcharge, and mechanisms high centers lines of travel, directing lines of the eyes, the windows of the soul, because we all live inside the element itself, which is its model of its identification, of its prototype, that it's its game in its modulation system. So you're all in the central eyes of the eye itself, the eyes, the windows of the soul. Now, we have to identify from inside, outside, inside, through the spectrum of its Earth itself. Now, for the bodies that understand it's coming into full acceptance and surrender, discernment, and position of repent, and levels of redeem, we all have to come into rejoice. Setting lines of retriangulation of core centers that puts all communication lines of tither, the attachments, set lines of screen adaptations and settings. The process calculates screen lines, sets lines of travels into 7 gigabytes. The set lines and high centers of tither activates the screen adaptations of flux. Setting lines of liquid information setting of Kelvin. Now the Kelvin line settings is 12,000 lines of 400 lines of units in setting lines into spectrum. Now we take the modification lines and high center locations and setting through C, processes communication lines of high direct center locations of classification A, direct lines of equals X, Y, Z. The platforms of communication setting sets all lines of tractions. Now, in that direct signals, once the body basically releases everything and becomes detached from everything of its physical element, becomes its metaphysical element, which is all levels of its dimensional being of light. Now, in that process of that communication setting, the Earth is now in its own system of its own operation setting. The symbiote doesn't come in track location to its system until everybody surrenders to their settings. And once you surrender, you find again all levels in your engagements, your direct signals to your grounds, your powers, and your atmospheres merge into each other through its Earth core. That's where it starts in lines of screen adaptations. Now the team units and position the operators are now in the liquid formation setting. They have to understand how to modify that through the 6 and 9 through modification system. Now this is all done through Kelvin. This is all done through hot and cold infusion. These incisions, floaters, and direct signals. So let's get into lines of tri-screens. A tri-screen is a direct line course centers, line communication of travels that sets lines as relays, course centers of Y to XYZ platform, directing lines of signals to an alphabetical setting to pixelation graphs. When I was a line screen adaptation as a kid, now when I'm saying was, I'm talking width, I'm talking awareness, I'm talking spectacle. So what you guys have to understand, it's a modification system, is the constant continuous flow that has an internal and external force through the cataracts, to the eye receptors, to the spectrum, to your set track locations. Set lines of your cerebro, directing lines of your endorphins in position of Sirius, corresponding high centers in line communication A, B, and C, and D interactions. DX lines of 1, platforms over C, directing lines of course centers of classifications of A. Okay? All right, so directing lines of grounds. show you exactly how it sets lines of high core centers and metric meters of scales and balanced communication lines of flux. Set in sequence lines of panels. We're all in digital worlds now, every single one of us. Now we have to modify the universal language of its Earth itself. The Earth itself is morphing itself. It's getting to know itself. It's evolving itself. It knows exactly where it is now, where it's always been, where it's never left. Now we're at that frequency now with the body of the temperature reading that sets 9 line core centers and lines of travel, in position lines of 6 lines of measure, scales of communication setting, and 9 lines of sequence of panels. Now the process of communication setting, process lines of center operation setting, 3 cores, and set lines in set position. Center core system, interaction. Right? So it's like splitting the Earth in half through a core and settings, right? So you got the liquid formation of core, interactions. All right, that's the liquid formation setting. Set lines and I-line screens, 3 lines of signals and 3 centers, the 3 lines of measure and scale in the same direction, right? Now, you have 4 lines of central settings of core, okay? You have the liquid formation setting, okay? Then you have the anti-mantle, okay? And then you have the core mantle, and then you got the crust, okay? And then you have the hard core. Sets lines and settings, and then you got the high position lines of travels, inhabitation of 6, setting lines of core centers, another 6 inhabitation, and then you have outline core centers, and then you have no set position lines of travel. Directing lines of grounds, sets core system. But all line communication in humanity starts here in interactions. Once they release and surrender, they automatically get into the I receptor interact correlation system, all through measure and scale. Sets lines of communication setting in the same direct signals as 6 and 9s of flux. Setting lines of sequence and 3 lines of signals in set position, right? So they go through pi generation screen, 3 lines of seconds, 3 lines of measure, 3 lines of balance, and all set position in the same track locations. So the center core lines of the Earth is the liquid formations of crust now. The center core system lines of the descent calculation setting is all levels of pyrites. Now pyrites core lines, high position lines of Kelvin. Cold and hot infusion, the lines of seconds, meters, and miles, sets core lines into kaleidoscope. Directing lines of signals, ground lines of spectacle, screen lines adaptations, and center core systems of the Earth interactions. Now, directing lines of modification lines, 144,000 frequencies of grounds, powers, atmosphere, and highways is now in central systems in set position above and set position below in track locations your eye itself. That's where we are in interactions right now. All right, so let's get a modification grounds. I showed you in picture frame and direct signals and ground lines of surface interactions off the colorations of patterns. Pixelation graph and set position all through operation system inside calculations. The eye itself. Creating this pixelation graph through its projector with projection. Hooah. All right. Everything's done from the eye itself, guys. Once we modify the system locations, we have to understand how to go to the liquid formation settings. So the Earth goes one way, and your body has to go in the same direction, right? So that's the merge. You get in your conscious line, your direct signals, your modification ground, calculation, screen adaptation, your super consciousness. Sets on hot infusion and cold infusion in one cycle. Set lines track centers of 4 panels of one system. Then you can add core centers lines and high position lines of 3 questions, directing lines of flux over screen. Now, in the modification ground lines, the liquid formation system, change the seconds, miles, and meters, lines of seconds, minutes, and hours. Sending communication lines of grounds at center core system interactions. So we have 2 uplifts and 2 downlifts in the eye central system. Okay? All right. So this is the Earth line. I'll show you exactly. 4 street screens, 3 lines of signals. Okay, coming into all lines of all process to your nature setting. Okay, this is your Earth. You are in the center of the Earth once you surrender and get into your metaphysical system. Okay, so we live in the I central setting, which is the liquid formation system, which is the energy core to the galactic energy core of Mother Earth. All right, so we go into the brown line, the sequence lines of panels. This process is communication lines, set lines, and direct lines of link. We overcross the screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Correlates the calculation setting, liquid formation screen lines adaptation. All right, now we get in calculation screens, and we get into blue, which is the blue lines core centers, and position location are 7 bodies of water. 7 bodies of water sync each other, line screen adaptations, all screens, set a communication setting. The process calculation line is pieces and pulses, which is your country's central settings, process lines and direct signals and modification grounds at set attractions. Okay, that's your Earth. You are the center core, basically controlling the Earth inside the center of the liquid formation of the core itself, which is its anti-mantle. There's a liquid formation mantle, and there's a hardcore mantle, and there's a crevice set position of center calculation setting. When you split lines of anomaly through Earth itself, you see the central setting of liquid formations. All right, so that's metal interface, right? That's connected to high screen depth and levels. The process calculates screen lines comes from Mercury. Mercury adds lines of 70% lines of 30 tractions. That's 100% lines. Setting lines at Kelvin. That's 1,000 meter, 1 tractions. One direct signals, ground lines at surface, and Pluto sets lines at 3 signals, lines at 2, 2, 2, and set lines and tractions. Coloration lines of red, directing lines of blue, directing lines in cloak and dagger. Now, cloak and dagger has a high line signal and lines invisible chart waves that correlate system locations into invisible ways and center calculations. Now, the center core system has a liquid information lines of change. The pixelation graph changes all lines in perimeters over pi. Center core centers lines of travel. You work with the center system, and then you work with the outer system. You work with the inner core, a projector, into the outer core, a projection, through the eye center position. So the position lines the high center. Now the box frame doesn't come in provision until we understand the inner surface of its antimentium, crystalline, okay, silicone, carbon. You understand that? It starts with those provision lines of cycles of chronological order and line communication setting and travel. Setting lines of metal interface to mental capacities that sets the psychological connection system to its psychosis of its eye division locations to its crevice and track location to its liquid information setting and grounds. The ground lines of signals opens on the high centers of travel communicating setting to the earth tones and track locations. All right, now this is where the coloration lines of panels come in. It's better to process that positions. A team needs to understand what I want you to do now. It's kind of like, it's not a quiz, but it's based on all levels, how you see a TV on and how you see TV off. I need you guys to see a snowy graph interference at TV. I need you to see a liquid information setting of high track locations of the TV. I need you guys to see the pixelations of the TV, and I need you to see the moderations of its TV and sound tones. That's how you're going to direct all lines of communication and awareness to the location setting to its harmonics. Everything has a line signal. Everything's connecting lines at high position at the same level, just different frequency of the eye divisions. Everything's done through the eyes, everything's done through the windows, and track locations and set positions. That's your earth in setting, that's you in the set position travel. All right, so the liquid information gets hot. Now, a hot line corresponds to globothermal lines at screen adaptational levels, has a climate change. Now, the environment changes the climate screen adaptations once you understand 4 panels of sequence. Summer, spring, winter, and fall is now a central line that's an intricate set positional location of the pyrites. Directing lines and core centers of Kelvin. Directing lines at set position of Celsius. Correlation setting position lines of Fahrenheit. Directing lines of barometers and thermometers and track locations. Everything is in a set position to its Earth itself. Directing and redirecting system to Mother Earth is a track location setting to its computer operation of your digital world that's connected to your simulation to your AVR system and all position lines of traction. All right, so the high line signals, as we go in the same track location of same distance, same position, same power, same traction, same locations, sets lines of seconds, minutes, and hours. Now the Earth changes the modification of the lines. Okay, it has a modality, line screen adaptations of flux. Now the core lines of its Earth starts with the brown line sequence. Center core lines of tractions, direct lines of signals, process lines indicate system of solar generation screens, changes the mutation grounds of surface and tractions. Now as it's changing the high centers, it's going to the center core system of its Earth in the line rotation center and tractions. Coloration lines of patterns of 12 lines of measure. Synchronize and high line connecting high line positional lines of measure. Scales communicates lines of high direct signals into red line sequence, into cataracts and center. 3 lines of signals and 3 track location setting and travel. Okay, now we get into set lines of core centers. This is how you change the pixelation of lights. Setting lines of resolution, core centers, Mandela effects, or anything, a butterfly effect. Changing the earth line core, change core centers. Mother Earth changes their centers of seconds, minutes, and miles. Setting core lines of roots over screen rounds, communicates lines of high direct signals, and 3 lines of flux, and 4 set position travels, setting a galactic energy core, and infusion, and direct lines of incision. Directing lines of grounds over lines of sequence. Now we work with line core centers. The 3 central settings is the blue. Blue lines of signals over cross location of the red that indicates the cross lines of pixelation graph. The center lines is communication setting all through travels. In line position locations, the 144,000 line pyra. Line core centers of Kelvin, directing signal lines of cold and hot fusion and center core system, starting up with 98,000 lines in measure and scale, which is percentage of pi. Set lines of over roots, line connects and high center locations, 2 lines of value. Setting lines of core track correlates and setting in Fahrenheit. directing lines of signals to 108,000 measure screen, directing lines of signals and flux over screen and adaptations of flux. Okay, all through the eye central calculations. So when the mother's changing the setting, you have to go with the continuous flow. You can't go through the opposite set lines of high center interference. You affect everything if you sneeze, if you cough. You understand that? You affect everything because you're in the center operation now. So what you have to understand is the merge. You merge and you sync each other in one position, one traction, one division, one location, all at once. You change your thoughts, you're changing your spectrum of your earth and direction through delta heading. So the center core system is a link information setting that has to have a process calculation lines of a graph that goes in the same directions of the internal to the external force that moves together in the central setting, existing and evolving all at once, in same time measure, in same level, just different frequencies in track communications. So the team needs to keep an eye line cycles into the mothership of the mind's eye in position of their body frame and metaphysical calculation setting to their transformers, their galactic units, their symbiotes, or anything through their avatar sequence, or calculate and modify through their higher self. Pixelation graphs in Schumann resonance and travel. Okay, so once we have the central lines, the decentral lines, the defrags, the fragmentation system, the binary core set, and line calculation set, and the sim cortex, your Earth is now in a digital all-platform set calculation lines at 144,000 pyro. Setting track lines and high calculation lines at Kelvin. Directing signal lines at ground lines of surface set positions in Celsius and Fahrenheit. Setting lines at high position of its atmospheres. Setting lines of communication lines at high position to its automatic view. Directing signal lines at grounds at 3 lines of flux at 4 lines of core centers at travel communication lines at 24,000 grounds, setting communication lines at 48,000 frames, position lines at 72,000 computer framing, directing to 144,000 crystal grid that opens all the eye-line sequence to the mind's eye that puts position locations that modificate the system that merges and mutates the settings of transformation setting to the mothership in track communications, all in set location of seconds, meters, miles, metrics, scale roots, bounds of communication grounds in square root. All right, so directing signals. We modify the ground lines. Now we center line the centers in set position location measure. So we got the calculation lines in the red line, the sequence core centers to the cataract, changes the red line screen adaptation to security at 3 lines of panels, sets position of 34 into 36 fields in setting. Setting travels in point lines of graph and 3 lines of measure. Scales communication on 4 lines of calculation setting to Kelvin. Directing on one cycle is 1 point line graph, 1 zero gravity line rotation cycle. This is going to get very complicated, but I'm talking to the Earth itself now, inside me. So the direct lines of ground lines has a high line circuit. Now that high line circuit has a ground line symbolism. Directing lines across lines communicates in setting to a gravitational pull. The ground line signals its modification ground lines as service. Now the high core centers, we come into the green line, sets of metric meters and scale into all of the metric ground centers. This is what happens when the mothership is changing its shape and anomaly in seconds, meters, and miles, meters, and metrics in core lines calculation setting, all through track communication to its high set position. Okay? So it's a 4-line flux of core lines, core centers, lines of travels, and 3 box frames, and lines of E equals M mass, setting calculation screen adaptations, all track locations. So for her to change her system, she's got to go through 12 lines of measure. Now, when she goes through 12 lines of DNA, the God's heads come in. Now, those God's heads are flux lines of screens. She works through a galactic energy core. She shifts her anomalies in seconds over line. You guys are in half a second now. So you got to stay way ahead of schedule now with your body framing. At least lines, 2/3 lines of graph. You can't be in position location into 6 lines of graph because it overrides your system interactions. So you got to get out of your thoughts, your actions, and your motions more than ever now, because your particle streamline is connected to Tither through Mother Earth and tractions through the motherboard, setting lines of circuits over lines of screen. So as she goes through her 12-line screens, let's go into pink. Now pink is basically how you see pink. Pink is line screen adaptations all levels. So it goes to the ventricle system, to the heart line, to the arc line, rotation, surface, and tractions. Okay, now her central setting. Let's get to that positions at all levels. Setting lines of sequence into ground lines of surface and travel to its surface lines. Okay, now the position lines of panels. Her central system changes line directions. Okay, the seconds and meters, and miles change the square roots of pi. Now we have to center line the core centers and how to center its position location and measure and scale. Setting lines of high position locations, you get into millimeters, centimeters, nanometers, Everything line, position, location is a ruler of change. This is variable change, where basically when she shifts, you shift at the same time measure of scale. You got to synchronize yourself and set position of value to understand her universal language to your universal language, so you can merge and transform to each other in the same direction, in the same flow, internal and external through the liquid formation setting. You don't want to change your eye line sequence and turn it into solid measure through an anti-mantle. It's very powerful, right? When your eyes get dry, right, they turn yellow, right? That's crevice, right? That's what you're doing. You're changing the liquid formation setting and it's going solid. So what you have to identify is that we all live in the eyes of the minds of the psi. The high core center is the psychological connection setting. That's the psychosis to the psychological system of reset. Processing communication setting is a metric meter mile set locations. Setting lines to the AVR system processes its communication to highest centers of charge, mechanism lines of force of recognition. Okay, so we do the same thing in the ground. We add the lines of tether, we add a black line force, then she adds her solar systems. 3 tracking centers, lines of force, and constellation screen. Okay, this is all through mother, okay, inside the earth. You guys are into the center point system and setting, right there in instructions. That's you, right? So you're trying to understand the earth itself, okay? You have a modification of earth, she has a modification of earth. So what you have to understand, she's on her own system now. She's working on her own system. She's in her own highway. She's in her own metric meters and scale roots and pi. She's in her own system, location, and setting. So to merge with each other and track location is a connect line link to our settings and set position. Setting lines, operational lines, unification lines, high core centers where it's relay, directing lines of sync lines, core centers of telepathy into yourself through each other interactions. 1 division, 1 location, 1 center, 1 tractions. 4 lines of ones, 3 lines of spectrum, 4 set position of flux, all through track communications. All right, so she merges in line position lines of high centers of Pluto, directing signal lines and line sequence, high position lines of panel, process lines that indicate system, all lines of channels. Then she has the core centers, directing signals and ground lines of setting, all through communication setting of Jupiter. Setting travels. Remember, you go through the 12 lines of measure that scales the soul line connection high center interference in solar roots. A solar root is a core line calculation setting that neutralizes the core center location's high center. The operation cycle sets communication setting. Then she goes to the metric meters and screen adaptations of flux, setting lines of travels, in-point lines of graph, and position location of Mercury. Mercury is the metric meters and scale communication of battery that change the core centers of 70 line settings, or 80 over 20, or line position of 60 over 40, or line position location measure and scale communicate to its system. Okay. Now, once she has her 3 central setting, that's her forks of a constellation screen. Okay. So in that position, she goes through pi generation screen line. This is all through Mother Earth. All right. Black line screen adaptation of the lines of space line. So the liquid formation of the light changed the spectrums of pi in center core system into 12 lines of measure in a 24 scale. Center core centers line direct signals, ground lines of surface, and track to its communication setting, offline communications. Okay, all through Mother Earth. All right. So when she merges and are changing, you have to go in the same direct signals and modification grounds. All right. So once you get into that position lines, it changes the pi lines and 1/3 lines of ground. 6 lines of measure, 9 lines of sequence, and 12 lines of calculations. Setting the lines of 24,000 ground lines of surface. Now the pyrites comes into pyro, directing lines in high core centers, line connect and high set position on its gateway. Directing lines of solar panels, lines connects and stargates, measures and scales, set position lines of 13 lines of measure. That's calculated and modified through solar track communication setting to the higher self. Higher self lines of merge in position lines of power points. Then it comes in all core centers, lines of travel, directing lines of links, process calculation lines of data. Now the process calculates lines of data formations of grounds. Set position, data box, and setting of travel. Process calculates overcross line screen and position locations in Jupiter rising that merges set lines of sectors, vectors, and quads. 3 central line core centers. 3 lines of windows. Set position of 4 lines of windows and 7 lines of sequence, setting lines of travel. So you got three track correlation settings. Now, in that position, opens its box frame, its window frame, its track frame, its modulation, and its launch pad, and 4 lines of signals and travel communications. Okay? So she's constantly changing her time sequence in 3 lines of panels. She's processing her line direct signals in 3 lines of communication lines of surface, lines of grounds. her center core system, is rotating her system line signaling that open line ground line surface and all line position of her capsule that changes all direct signals in line position of its computer system all through travel. Hooah! So you have to be in control now because your particle stream is now attached to the central system, to your server that's connected to my mainframe. So you cannot create thoughts, actions, and emotions anymore. Because everything you do, it affects everything you see, hear, touch, taste, feel. You're all connected to your sensories and your senses interactions. And that's everyone. Now, getting down to the delusion line and the high lines of formation, ground lines of surface, you get into surrender. You finally get in position where your body is in line communications because all it is a host to everything that it sees in all position of its conscious case to its awareness. And once we have a direct line link in position of process communication setting, they merge into each other. The symbiote comes in tractions, in direct signals. Once you surrender to everything, you disattach from everything in memory, you come in all formation, location, and setting, and then you merge into your galactic energy core, which is your Earth. Now, in that position, puts everything in lines of communication setting, a balance of intrications, all through tractions, all right? All right, so she's got her central system in 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds, 3 lines of powers, and 3 generations screen location of space. All right, and then she merges into a capsule, a full communication setting. Sometimes it takes seconds, sometimes it takes minutes, sometimes it takes hours of tractions. But when she morphs and transforms and mutates, she's in seconds, she's in minutes, she's in hours and frames. Now, where you guys are in your nanoseconds or half a second, you have to merge together and sync in the same direction of flow. You got to connect the line centers of fish, the Pisces air, okay, which is the correlation setting to Aquarius, direct lines of Libra, direct lines of all calculation lines in Sagittarius, direct lines of the link core centers, astral travels, astral connections, astral projections, the astronomics of you, the astrology of you, the astronomy of you, setting lines of communication, setting the solar direct core setting line communication, solar planets, solar systems, and line screen adaptations of flux in the same direction, in the same flow, in the connections at the same level, just different frequencies and set position lines of travel through a clocking foundation, existing and evolving each other, traveling together in sync line, high positions, high volume, and the highest formations of the mind's eye of itself through traction. Hooah. Done by equation. Okay? It doesn't get any more powerful than that. It really doesn't, guys. Okay? And you see it all inside position. All inside position. What is happening in set calculations? Because you guys are now infused and intricate in position. And all set position lines of setting. All inside of you. Inside, outside, spectrum, inside calculations. But you have to understand the liquid formations of balance. You have to understand liquid formation lines of yin and yang. You have to understand flux of yin and yang. Okay? So what this is basically understanding how to come in positional lulls in lines of communication setting to consciousness of everything in outside traction. Spinning in all directions in the same setting. All through set position. Okay? I know, it's like, whoa, okay, it's like, let me take a minute here. This is like way over my head. Of course it is. All right, so now we get into the central system of your eye. Now the inner spectrum is the outer spectrum, inner line cycle. So we have 3 lines of gaps. Now the gap is the grounds, the atmosphere's lines, basically what's all going into your oxygen settings. There's an oxidized system. There's fumes and gases. Now you have to understand how to neutralize that in lines of gravitations, high positions. Now changing core centers is changing your Kelvin, directing lines of barometers, thermometers, location setting to your global network system. Same lines of networks sets all communication in high settings. Okay, so we process communication lines of triangulation into the eye centers and process communications. 3 central lines. So once you understand the triangulation, your synchronized line communication settings, the flux lines, is the earth core. It's the liquid formation setting to the antimantle. Remember, you have to understand the antimantle, you have to understand the anticaryon, you have to understand the crystalline, you have to understand the silicon, you have to understand the carbon. These are the things that Mother Earth travels through. She's a mother pod. She's the mothership. She's a mother vessel. So she's on her own position location cycle, changing her Earth lines of track calculation. She is on her own now, which is your Earth. So what you have to understand, the process of position location is territorial. Setting lines of communication, setting you merge with each other. It's like merging with Father through space. That's next level. Stay tuned for more. Setting lines of track center is just getting grounds with the Earth itself. Once you get grounds with the Earth gets grounds with its space, and the space gets ground with the Earth. So you get a 3-line provision. Sets lines of flux, inside track location lines, infinity 8. Inside tracks of the eye. Then it goes through propellers of 4 lines of track center location setting to an oscillation wind path. And set lines of 4 settings. Then you track lines in your lotus, and then you come into flower track location setting to travel inside the eye set position. Okay, so the central setting comes in line settings. The process that communicates in setting, but you have to come into the merge and create it through its tree. The branches, the leaves, sets lines of communicates in setting all through serpent through its cloud. The eye line rotation cycles, high generates the screen lines through central to its eye cloud to its central cloud. Direct lines and eternity cloud and screen adaptations. You come into the tree of life in the eye central system and ground lines of surface. Ooh-ah. So you create the tree of life inside your system. You create the lotus. You create the propellers. You create the oscillation. You understand that? So now you have to have the continuous flow to keep the liquid formation setting so it doesn't get hard. The antimantle has to be a continuous flow. The anticarine has to be a continuous flow. The crystalline, the silicone, and the carbon, okay, is now neutralized in the liquid formation setting. In one cycle, one division, one location, one center. Your Earth is now in a central core system. Your body is in its central core settings. Through summer, spring, winter, and fall. It's the 4 central settings of one gap, setting core line calculation lines of 5 elements and set position location of travel. All through track locations. The tree of life inside the eye. All right. Everyone's going, whoa, this is a lot. This is a lot. It is. But you truly understand how this is all set up now and set position inside the eye itself, the windows. So once you get in that position, you come in your box frame. You outline the screen adaptation, outlines of circuits. Okay, and then you get in position to travel through the outlines. So the actual tree itself formulates and outlines the signals of location to a system. It travels out. When it travels out, it syncs out. It sets here, it sets here. Now it's outlined to sync in set position. Right, so it's expanding itself, getting to know itself. Modification to itself, all through operation of itself, self-modification to itself, self-development of itself, expansion. Then the position lines of high centers, the tree itself becomes a life formation of itself, calculates and setting to its webbing system. Once it comes in its webbing system, changes all track centers inside track communication, inside setting. Okay, all through traction. Okay. All right, so when you understand line core centers, the mothership's here. All right, this is the mothership right here on its own digital platform now, right? It's on its own platform. Okay, now, once you surrender in that position line high center location setting, you merge in the center of your Earth, which is your gain modulation system. So what you're doing is you're changing the liquid formation lines of pixelation graphs and creating a projector to projection to a light signal that puts all communication to its moon. The moon beam is basically keeping inside the eye line. The eye line itself is never drawing outside the spectrum. You stay within the spectrum of light. This work goes in light codes and dark codes. Sending lines of core centers into the dark side of the moon and the light side of the moon. Light side of the sun and the dark side of the sun. This is the positional case in how you see light and dark. Light and dark is not what you think it is. All it is a spectrum of light, and all it is a spectrum of dark and shades and shadows. Now, once you understand how to direct that in position location and settings, you can add picture frames and set positional attractions to a level and track location to a system through a ruler. Direct lines of grounds and set position lines at high surface. All right, I know it's going, whoa, way over my head. Well, that's what it's supposed to do, isn't it? Living in the eye itself, living in the spectrum of itself, living in the pixelation of itself, living in its imagination of a core itself, living in the inner core of its mind of itself, which is all what? Your simulation. All right, so this is where it's going to be all the time now. You guys are here. You're trying to understand how to get into flux, the 3 centers. You're here to understand how to go in the same direction inside tractions of 6 and 9 in a continuous flow. And once you go into that continuous flow, it creates a spiral, creates a Fibonacci in set position. All right? Now, that's a cataract line screen adaptation. Your floaters, once you go faster and faster, you're creating your cerns. Your cerns come out in 12 lines of cycles. Right away, in set position of particle acceleration system to your torical fields and sending attractions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 cerns attractions to particle acceleration. Okay, that's how your eye starts up. Now, once you get your core center line condition setting, you have a spectrum over center. Process lines of 3, process lines of 4, and 7 lines of measure. Okay, that is your open window, a 7-day sequence. Setting proxy in position locations to on-car centers, on-car line calculation, online division, offline rotation cycles, and traction. It's all done from inside the eye. Nothing is outside the eye itself. So the Earth itself is the center core, which is your cataract. 3 lines of signals, 4 lines of flux. Setting 12 lines of measure as scales of CERN. Now, once you have the center core system, as the center core centers of liquid formation setting reaches a certain lines of pyrite in position at Kelvin in cold and hot fusion, the center core center sets position to circulate and rotates in the same direct signals of flux. There's your Saturn. Creating Saturn. There's a planet inside the eye. It gets more complicated when you get a true understanding of how to use it in track communication inside position. That's why you have 12 line central centers in position of your CERN that overlines the signals inside its spectrum of light in set track communications. All right? Now, once you get into that, you go into circulation rotations in all different angles. You're creating the positional level from its lotus to its flywheel. The propellers operate the system and travel. That's next level. Hooah. Okay? So this is what happens when you merge inside your Earth. You got to rotate and circulate your system in the same direct signals into modification of telepathy with yourself and each other. Okay? This is all done from the eye central setting. All right, so when you get that, you get into torical fields. The torical fields has an upline center and a rotation system at Travis. Okay? And that position lines the calculation settings of travel. Okay? Then you have downshift lines of anomaly, 3 lines of circuits and set position location setting. This is the Epicneser in set track location setting of travel. There it is in set position. The Epicneser. Hooah. Now you truly understand what the matrix is all about. All through the eye center settings and travel. All right, so you got 4 windows of flux, 3 lines of measure and scale. Now, center core centers, this is your right ear, this is your left ear. Okay, this is your cerebro, okay, and this is your flux ground. That's calculation setting to your throat line core centers and your solar track location setting. That's a tether line screen adaptations of flux over screen. Direct lines of ground is a set position location you're setting to your throttle. Your throttle is here, travel. That's your neck. Now, once you extend this central system, then you extend your track communication to its system. Okay? Now, coming from eye line centers, set position lines of travel. Remember, you got to be inside position to understand what's going on. So it's the eye, it's looking from outside in, inside out of your system. The modulation screen has an electrical line infusion, set 1 here, flux down, electrical lines of wire, and center core setting into solar graph, a spectrum. The archetype spin the cycles lines of 24,000 lines of grounds. Sets core centers 9,000 pyrite, directing the lines of Kelvin. Direct lines of signals and cold infusion line condition setting, starting off with 98 Celsius and set positional calculation screen lines and overlines of flat. Flat measure, flat scale, flat balance. Okay, flat line. Now the flat line changes the core centers that change the circuitry lines of element, change the Earth core center that stops the signal and rotates the system to the opposite system. Once it changes the opposite system, now the Earth itself, that's in position of the center core view, goes back in time. The central setting is turning off a light and turning it back on in central setting through 0, 1 in gravity. Setting lines of travel, sets communication setting all through flux. So we have a central line core centers and to connect to the throttle, direct lines of 2 panels in position of its highway in central settings and circuits, 3 lines of communication setting, high lines of track location to its perimeter. Sending core lines into 3 highways and line direct signals of grounds. Sending offline core centers and highways in position outside track communication to 3 lines of measure. Scales communication outline screen lines adaptation inside track communication to its surface. There's your highway inside the eye. And in position, location, and then you add the platforms, right? In central line, there's the platforms attached. And then you go from here, and then you attach your 3 lines of signals to 3 grounds and set position of surface. All right? And then you do the same thing in travel. Setting course centers, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of ground calculation setting of travel. Okay, the central setting position. So you're creating this all from inside the eye line. Okay, the core line is the cataract, the signal location of the liquid formation lines is the anticarrion, the antimantle, directing lines of signals, ground lines of surface. Now the process communication lines hold lines high centers into an energetic dome. The dome lines of sequence lines of ground lines of surface and track communication setting and ground lines of setting. The process communication clock lines has a direct line of link. Now we pan a line, we change up all line course centers of center communications and high lines of surface and configuration of face recognition. Whoa, a lot to understand, eh? All right, inside and outside through tractions. Okay, guys? Inside and outside. All right. So what you're saying, your 4 lines of signals and all direct signals and grounds. Everything modificates the system inside and outside through tractions. Okay, inside calculations. All through your highways. All right. Now, once you get into highways, you set up bold screens. So bold screens allocate time frame illumination ground. So we open all the signals, modify the mine lines, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of grounds. Set lines over cross location screen lines adaptation. Okay. Now we central lines and settings of 3 lines of wire circuits. This is your server connected to the mainframe. Mainframe is the central system outside tractions, which is all of it's a space-time operation. Okay. So there's 4 circuitry elements. This is where the pillars of lights come in through bears of lights, 4 travels, point lines of graphs. Center course system is central line calculation, setting neutralization and travel. Okay, so I have a direct line light, setting lines of course centers of tither. It has the flywheel and track communication to its system. Okay, and over lines of signals into its temperature reading. Gauging's moderation system all through travel. Okay, then you core lines of ground lines ascending and high lines of surface, set lines of ground line communication setting all through torcal fields, directing lines of grounds and set position location, measure and scale through all can be modified. This is where you come into the oculars. All right, the oculus. Okay, the ocpi, right? The central eye, the correlation eye, the cataract eye, direct eye, high position mind's eye, the formations eye, correlations eye, eyes of Horus, okay, eyes of a Iris. So it's all set position inside tractions. Now, once you send the flux lines of screen, the electrical lines and diffusion changes tractions. Now, getting in that communication lines has a high temperature reading. This is where you set up a thermometer. Now, a thermometer line position locations, all line course centers, and traction starts off at 98. That's a measure of scale of balance, okay, with a flux reading. Now, that directs signals to your atmosphere's oxygen size high center location to its system. But on your Earth line track correlation setting, it's 98,000 measure, okay, of Celsius, and 2 position lines of overline sequence of Fahrenheit. That puts lines in high positions at all tractions to what? 100,000% through pi. The ocular line screen adaptation to its system changes all course centers and metric meters in calculation of your weather panels, sending line course centers into your global thermal nuclear screen. Directing ground lines into 3 lines of flux sets core lines of tractions in position of your summer, spring, winter, and fall. This center core system sets a barometer of thermometer lines of changing of gauging that change the communication of your occupies and track location lines of your tentacles that change communication of your highways in each direction in the same cycle, same center, same level, different frequency of time measure and scale, existing and evolving, and everything happening all at once in real time measure, scale, and balance, all future track locations. Okay? Okay, so directing lines into your pyrites, core lines of 3 lines of highways and travels, 6 lines of measure, 9 lines of sequence, high course centers, each direct signals of 4 lines of signals and panels of communications. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. We change communication lines of angles and travel and set tractions. All right, change the pillars of lights, change the direct signals, and all of this. This is where you guys finally get in position locations to allow us how to use your paradoxal setting, your paradigms, your polar shifts, and your compulsories. The pulsars is the line screen adaptations to flux. The time sequence adds 3 lines of screens, 3 lines of signals, 3 lines of tractions, and 2 lines of grounds. The overline sequence has a box frame track location inside travel. I know it's a lot, guys? Just bear with me here. 4 lines of signals in the bottom. And we allocate time frame lines of data that process inside tractions, sets lines of measure and scale, balances communication setting all through track communication pixelation graphs. 4 lines of setting, 3 lines of measure. Each line has a box frame of data that processes lines of the pillars of light that opens all position with paradoxical screen adaptation of its particle acceleration setting that processes communication lines of 12 lines of measure of your CERNs. Sets lines of torical fields, sets up the ocular lines, sets up the occupi in the central system in your eye spectacle setting to your pineal glands. Now the pineal gland is the high core centers of its placement. Directing calculation lines to its intelligence neutralize the core centers of its networks that sets the eye line screen adaptation to its system all through tractions. All through high lines, all through signal, all through communications. Ooh, very powerful stuff, inside, outside traction. That's all done from inside your eye central setting. Hoo-ah! Okay? It's like, you know? But I'm just showing you how it all starts in tractions, all through settings, all through measure, all through scale. So what you're doing is you're creating a lotus inside the eye. What you're doing is you're creating a flower of recognition of time measure. What you're creating is a vessel. What you're creating is a pod. What you're creating is a mothership. You're creating that all inside your eye. What you're creating is a pixel. What you're creating is a schematics. What you're creating is a drawing. What you're creating is through your imagination. And it's all done through your chakra system. All through colorations and lights. All through the hologram. To create the pixelation is to create the graph through a hologram. It's all through the eye central setting, which is connected to your cataracts. Now, the cataract is a dichotomy switch. Now, the dichotomy switch is a high line setting to dualities, directing lines of flux, knowing that the reality you want to align in position location your settings. If you have a spectral light, you got to be careful what you do with your eye line screen adaptations. That's what gets cataracts, lines, core centers, lines of travels, and directs the location of your eye line screen adaptations of the flux over screen that change the measures of screen adaptation system location to all lines of Pluto that sets lines of sequence off calculation setting or all lines sequence locations and to track location to its provision to its flux over its set location. Very complicated, but it's a lot of fun when you really get to understand how to communicate with your universal line in your body frame communication of your metaphysical system and understand how to communicate with your earth in its own formation of its own universal setting. In communication inside and outside, inside core of you, through the eye receptor in the set position locations of E equals mc squared. That's it. All through track locations. Create the lotus, create the flower, create the tree, then you create your vessel inside your eye. You start off line position your XT1000. You start off with all position location your towers. You create lines of stargates and portals. You create through the eye line setting. You create the spectacle screens, but you have to modify your rulers and know exactly how to create it through all communication, all lines of your genetics, your process communication, your semetics, your cymetics, high screen lines, pi line, core centers, lines of travel. I mean, there's so many line communication settings to really set up your holographic city and set position of the eye itself that sets a projector to its projection through its outline signals. That's how you come into its reality of manifestation of its abundance. We are done by equation. Stay tuned for more. See you in 5.